When you're watching it, you're cringing.
And where are you talking from now, Mr. Smith?
He takes it to a point where you think, well, that's the line. You draw the line there, Stephen. And then he'll go, no, I think I'm going to step straight over that and actually take a few more steps past it.
I just creamed myself.
It's only when you watch it afterwards you think, I said that? I did that? Did that really happen?
Delightful, actually, to know that I kissed Paul Brook.
Just one kiss? One proper kiss.
I was in Absurd Person Singing this year, as you know, and Paul came round and I just said hello, and David Horowitz said, how do you know Paul? And I said, I just, like actors know each other, I don't think we've worked together. I completely forgotten. I just snogged with him on chalk.
The second series was commissioned before the first series had been transmitted, based on the enthusiasm of our studio audiences. And it's true, they did go crazy for it.
As a result of that, the BBC then took up the options, so all the actors were hired to do the second series.
But there were to be 2 changes to the regular cast.
Richard Nixon, headmaster, no relation.
To everyone's shock, John Wells was unable to return due to terminal illness.
It was wonderful, actually, having John as the head, and very kind of optimistic and benign, and bringing in this rather kind of Etonian, Oxbridge sort of flavour.
I think you and I have got a lot in common. Well, I know I have, anyway.
He had a real gift for comedy and a wonderful combination of intelligence and silliness.
Chill out.
A wonderful, satirical, urbane, sly performer.
Pleased to meet you, Mr. Nixon. One of the best things about the job was meeting John Wells. I knew his work, thought he was absolutely brilliant, and then was terrified of meeting this man, and then found this incredibly kind, charming, witty gentleman.
Right then, well, never mind. Carry on.
Chalk was John's final television appearance. The new headmaster, with the equally presidential name of J.F. Kennedy, was played by Duncan Preston.
It was meant to be a new character, new headmaster. It clearly wasn't. It was clearly exactly the same character. There was no difference between them, no difference in the writing, no difference in the style. And indeed, in the very last episode, Stephen basically put in an absolutely outrageous gag that clearly revealed that these were exactly the same person, just clearly inhabiting 2 different bodies.
This is the new religious education teacher, Dick Foster.
Cock Foster. Jason Cock Foster.
Adding Cock Foster as a regular character in Series 2 was a very deliberate attempt to bring in a little touch of romantic interest.
Sex.
I'm sorry?
What was needed was someone who was an innocent and rather pure.
You might be just what we need.
And made us all look even more ridiculous than we probably were.
And he looked like an angel, Damien, so it was perfect.
In February '97, the high-fast Galfast High hit our screens for the first time.
We were all ready for this victorious showing of this sitcom that we all loved. And it came out, and I don't know that anyone else felt as passionately about it as the people involved.
Ahead of transmission, BBC Publicity had sought to draw parallels between Chalk's deputy head and the iconic Basil Fawlty. Outraged critics decried this blasphemy, and their words struck a chord with the viewers at home.
The BBC Publicity Department deciding that this comparison was going to be useful did undermine us.
If anyone publicised it as being the new Fawlty Towers, they made a terrible mistake because they're inviting comparison with something which you can't afford to be compared.
It certainly wasn't a welcome spin on the series as we were trying to get established.
I mean, it's a bit of a death wish to be compared to that. It really is.
And in fact, there's much more, I think, to the show and to the performance.
There was never any talk about Fawlty Towers in our rehearsal room. We never thought about it. So I feel for David when that comparison came through, because you can't do that. That's like saying that someone's trying to be David Jason. It's you set yourself up against a comedy god.
David Bamber's character was very different to Basil Fawlty's John Cleese, but I mean it's not totally outside of the ballpark. I can certainly see where the marketing people were coming from.
Yeah, that seemed terribly unfair because that isn't what David Bamber was doing at all, and that isn't what Stephen had written.
It's farce. He wrote it brilliantly. Just because Fawlty Towers is farce doesn't make Chalk the same as Fawlty Towers. It's farce.
It's a different sort of comedy. physical and fast, yes, but the things they're talking about are completely different.
It felt uncomfortable being compared, and both audiences and the press decided they didn't approve of the comparison.
If they instead said, hang on, there's an awful lot of comic invention here that we've never seen before, then the story might have been different.
Punish a pupil, will you?
Which one?
Well, I don't know. Just pick on any boy with an earring. You're a teacher, for God's sake.
There were comments from, I think, unions or from the teachers, the NUT conference, saying we're not like this.
And I seem to remember the Education Guardian was... letters page was full of complaints.
Have you disabled children at this school?
Well, a couple of times, but it was them or me.
For a teacher to look at a programme like Chalk and be offended by it, I find mind-boggling. There's so many other things in the world to be offended by than some really good jokes.
Tossers!
Everybody takes so much offence. They're all offended by everything.
Teachers from Channel 4, which is far more vicious towards the whole teaching profession than Chalk ever was. But Channel 4 was always quite good at dealing with that kind of harsh publicity.
I've just been talking to the other sixth form mothers. They've just heard about Helen, and they want to know if the school now qualifies for a creche.
It was fairly extreme in its depiction of life inside a school.
But extreme things happen in schools. You only have to open the newspapers.
Anyone who hasn't done their homework, out to the front!
Of course it goes a little too far, but then cartoons do.
I don't actually think it's a serious comment on the teaching profession in any way whatsoever.
Although, slightly worryingly, we do have to remember that Stephen Moffat, who wrote it, was himself a teacher.
Teachers probably watch sitcoms about hospitals and laugh their heads off. When the doctors watch ones about hospitals and the teachers about schools, they seem to get terribly po-faced, as if they then suddenly expect a sort of real-life documentary.
I warned her about getting involved with boys. I even confiscated her contraceptives.
Well, this isn't how I live. This is not reflective of my world. And then by about 2 or 3 seasons, they're the people who love it more than anybody else.
Stephen Moffat, I'm sure he was confused as well. And he was a teacher. It was coming from his own experience. I mean, I'm not obviously urinating out of windows and stuff, but I'm sure he didn't do that as a teacher.
But I would think for every negative comment, there are people who are going, that's just like my school.
It's about you beating Donald Cooper, a fourth year, into a virtual coma during football practice.
Well, what about it?
Do you think you could manage it this afternoon?
People you've never met before who turn out to be teachers, who fall on my neck and say, it was like that, it is like that. Nobody talks about it.
Frankly, since Wacko with Jimmy Edwards, teachers have been set up to be pilloried in comedy programmes, so I don't think that's something they should be too sensitive about.
What are you doing?
Oh, I'm in my naughty cupboard.
There was a lot of criticism of my performance, I believe. Certainly looking at it, I think I could be on the back foot a bit more, but then you get people coming on saying he's on the verge of having a nervous breakdown, and is he always like this, and he's insane.
I didn't have the responsibility that David Bamber had, which was a hell of a job, which I think he carried off in a masterly way.
You can see David Bamber, you can see him eyeing the audience a lot. I have an immense amount of respect for his ability to do a huge breakdown scene, huge physical scene, and also throw an eye at the audience. And they absolutely loved it. I don't think any of the rest of us ever dared to do that.
And it's only when you see the whole thing, 6 episodes of the first series over a period of a few hours, it's only then you realise how hard he worked, how hard it was physically. It was a very physical, energetic performance. He was on set most of the time, and then he had the responsibility of carrying the whole show.
I'm sure I don't need to remind you that a school closure is being seriously considered in this area.
We were shown at 9:30 for the first 4 episodes, and then they shunted it on to 10:20, which in nobody's book could be possibly described as a statement of faith in the production. Although it was also shown on a Saturday night at 11:30. I think the thinking being that if they don't like it sober, maybe they'll like it pissed.
I've never been able to understand why the audience in the studio found it so funny, and we are given to understand the audience in the sitting room didn't.
Because they'd already commissioned it, I didn't know if it was cheaper for them just to do the second series because it was commissioned rather than sort of contractually lay us all off.
And so location filming commenced on the second series the week after the first concluded its run. Despite everything, hopes remained high.
We just plough on, because it's great history in sitcoms of a first series not doing very well at all. Most of the great sitcoms had dreadful reviews for first series. And I think everyone hoped that would be the same with Chalk, that we would move onwards and upwards from the first series.
That proved forlorn.
Everyone in this school is finished!
I do not believe it failed as a show and as a collection of wonderful performances and scripts, but in terms of the people deciding not to make any more. And that comes down to somebody's decision. I mean, there's nothing to say they're right.
You utter bastard!
I don't know why it didn't go on, but maybe it was too advanced, maybe it was too filthy for its time.
It would also spell the end of the Moffat-Straczynski partnership, as by now the writer had met producer and future wife Sue Virtue.
I sowed, watered and cultivated the seeds of my own destruction because she worked for my closest friend, Peter Bennett-Jones, who runs Tiger Aspect Television. My first mistake was being one of two people to introduce Sue and Stephen, and my second mistake was to tell each of them how much the other fancied them. So Peter Bennett-Jones looked at me askance when he realised that both his television production company and mine were now going to be without both Moffat and Virtue as they disappeared off into the sunset together.
It is a little unfortunate. I mean, Stephen does some lovely work with Paula Jones, but it never quite gets the recognition that either of them would have liked, I guess. And then pretty much the second he leaves, he does Coupling, which becomes hugely successful, wins all sorts of awards, even gets a very short run in America.
I was jealous of it, to be honest. Having gone through a very enjoyable 4 years of working with Stephen, you kick yourself when the next project is a success.
And hoped very much to work with Stephen again. It's never happened. We've sort of bumped into each other at do's occasionally, and I always joke with him that I want to know why I was in Chalk and what happened. Where was the call? Where was the call when Coupling came? We were all in Chalk. Seems a bit unfair.
Boys! Chase! Oh, this is Mr. Humboldt, head of the physical education department.
Andrew Livingston, who played Mr. Humboldt, quit the acting profession altogether in 2002 to become a full-time artist. Working closely with former lighting director George Morris, their often humorous work is regularly exhibited.
I'm really pleased for him because I remember at the time him talking about his great passion was art. And it's rather remarkable, 12 years on, to hear that he followed that through.
Do you actually think that kind of thing happens in the real world?
Recently there was a story about a teacher who marked a paper where all the child had just written on the paper were the words "fuck off," and gave them 7.5% on the basis that was, at least it showed some idea of language and some construction. That's pretty much Chalk, isn't it?
I think he might well have come from Mr. Carkdale's class, in which case Mr. Carkdale would have given him 10 out of 10.
It's taken a decade, but I think that was precisely the kind of education system that Chalk was satirising.
It was almost ahead of its time.
He himself never said it. He was content with bollocks, bastard and bugger.
Thank you, Mr. Carkdale. Very apposite.
I feel at the time people were shocked. And you look at stuff now and it means nothing.
If they put it out now, I think it would get a huge following. Because I think the season has changed.
Had there been, at that time, a BBC Three equivalent, it would have been a great success.
A lot of young people especially would go nuts.
Sixth formers and students watching it, and young people watching it with the greatest of pleasure.
Considering some of the absolute crap that is now available on television, this is like gold dust.
Oh, my God!
Enjoyable though my 10 years of occasionally producing TV series was, for me, it doesn't come close to producing theatre and shows and the smell of the crowd and the roar of the grease paint and all that.
For me, it's not just a job, it's a period of my life. And this house that I lived in, my friend who slept in the living room downstairs on a futon that had mice living underneath it, so many mice, we named one Charlie Mouse and fed it ham. For me, it's part of my life, it's not part of my career.
Watching it makes me laugh. At the time it didn't. I was under the sofa thinking, I've got to go on a diet. Why can't I act?
This man and his daughter stopped me and he said the bungee rope episode of Chalk is the funniest thing I've ever seen on television.
I've just got to tell you that I really love your performance in, and I thought arrogantly that she was going to say the play that I was in Chalk, and I just thought, that's amazing, that was so long ago, and you're not a blood relative, so that's astonishing that you feel that way. But so for some people, it's something that they remember.